This is basically a series in which in each episode we will pick a new card, theory crafted, deck build with it, play a game with the deck, and then do a theoretical review of the card after the fact. This series will be called Successful Demonstration, Successful Demo for short. Welcome to episode 2 of Successful Demo. In each episode of this series, we will explore the
Welcome to episode 5A of Successful Demo. In each episode, we'll analyze the theoretical and practical aspects of one or more.
Welcome to episode 40 of Successful Demo. In each episode, we analyze the theoretical
Welcome to episode 23 of Successful Demo. In each episode, we analyze the theoretical and practical aspects of one or more cards. Welcome to episode Welcome to episode 25 of Successful Demo. Each episode, we analyze the theoretical and practical aspects of one or more. Welcome to episode 25 of Successful Demo. Each episode, we analyze the theoretical and practical aspects of one or more cards.
Welcome to this very special episode 50 of Successful Demo. Each episode analyze the theoretical and practical aspects of one of release cards. This episode 50 special has been in the works for quite a long time, well before the announcement of the ending of official support for Netrunner took place. And now that announcement has been made, well, it has only served to further encourage me, or rather motivate me to take a trip down memory lane and reflect on my Netrunner journey. So, fair warning, this video is going to have a lot of personal anecdotes, a lot of personal sharing. Trip down memory lane. You might not be prepared for all this nostalgia that's about to hit you, because today we are going to talk about the one card that single-handedly, in my opinion, the one runner card that made my Netrunner career, shall we say. This one card basically defined my Netrunner journey through the years, and that, it's none other than account siphon. This card is crazy. I didn't realize it at first when I burst open the core set, but geez, this card was to define my journey for many years to come. When I started out attending my first ever Netrunner tournament, account siphon was a very key component in my deck. I attended the Chronos Protocol tournament, that's more than 4 years ago, playing a Gabriel Santiago. You can tell that this was a relic of the past, and you can easily tell that this was my very first tournament, because I didn't own 3 core sets back then just yet. My console choice was 2 Desperado and 1 Doppelganger, because I did not have the 3rd copy of Desperado. You would also notice that besides running all 3 account siphons, I was also running it in tandem with Knight, and that's when I started realizing how powerful account siphon could be when it was unstoppable. Knight in this deck was able to practically guarantee my breaking of most ice. Back then, multi-sub ice were few and far between and were pretty weak overall, so Knight was able to break those ice for cheap, and basically had perfect coverage because it was an AI breaker, and this allowed me to land those crucial siphons, which proved to be instrumental in winning a lot of my matches. On that day, I played 5 rounds of Swiss and Gabe went completely undefeated. That was 2014. We move on to 2015, where I forgot to mention, in this Chronos Protocol tournament, I actually came in top 8, pretty decent considering it was my first ever official tournament. Got a playmat out of it. To this day, this is still, I think, my most nostalgic playmat, simply because it was the first one I got. Moving on to 2015, exactly 1 year later, participated in regionals, and this time I discovered the power of account siphon when you recurred it with same old things and even put in an extra dab of salt into your opponent's wounds as you play Vamp as well. To quote myself from my regionals report back then, this is what I had to say about the siphon Vamp combo.
I first click siphon them, second click vamp them down to 0. I could run the Nisei server, they couldn't play the Capri side game, they couldn't pump that trace of Ash Trace. They lost their entire scoring server along with the Nisei Mark II. And that won me the game.
Yep, and that was the moment where I switched over to the dark side. learning that you can unlock your opponent into submission with this much credit denial. That was when Account Siphon really began sticking to me as a card of choice, as a go-to card that many people did not know how to respond to. In 2016, well, no surprises there. You know what happened at Worlds. Since most of you know about it already, we won't go in-depth into it. Suffice to say that the credit denial was real. What you probably forgot, however, was that in the lead up to Worlds, I attended a regionals a couple months back, and I was playing a Kate deck with Account Siphon. This was when I realized that Account Siphon was so good that it could be basically played out of every single faction. I mean, the Max deck played Siphon out of faction. Kate does too, and surprisingly, for Influencer Pop, it's still worth it. Here's what I had to say back then.
Now we move into the heart, the core of what defines this deck. The 2 Account Siphons and 3 same old things to recur them.
This sounds like someone from the dark side, doesn't it? Yeah, what can I say? Account Siphon has defined my journey all the way from core set days to Worlds 2016. It was that powerful of a card, and I mean, it defined Netrunner, right? Netrunner was warped by this one card. Corps had to play around Account Siphon at all times, and sometimes you just hit them when they least expect it. Who expects Kate to run Siphon? Well, that's me. So yeah, that's basically up to 2016 in a nutshell. Then after that, what happened was Account Siphon got basically banhammered, so that my competitive Netrunner journey ended there. Not! They decided to reprint Account Siphon, and this is what we're going to talk about today. Today we're going to be covering a card from Kampala Ascendant that is meant to be the Account Siphon replacement. Post-rotation, it's Diversion of Fun. So aptly named because this card does exactly what Account Siphon does. It turns a fun game for both players playing Netrunner into a game where only the runner's having fun. The core player, meanwhile, is, is occupied clicking for credits because they can't do anything else. Hence, Diversion of Fun. Now, unfortunately, or should I say fortunately for the game, Diversion of Fun is inferior to Account Siphon in basically every single way. It has a 1 play cost, it costs all 5 influence, it gains 5 fewer credits. Account Siphon gains 10 on a successful full siphon, whereas Diversion of Fun merely diverts the 5 credits from the corp to the runner, so you get twice, or rather half the gain from Diversion of Fun. It also doesn't give you 2 tags, and while that seems like an upside, in reality this means that it doesn't support the Tag Me archetypes. You can't import Diversion of Fun into Clan Arc, those Tag Me Anarch decks, and expect it to perform work like it did in DLR Max. So it is, in a sense, a downside. But I think the biggest downside of all of Diversion of Fun compared to Account Siphon is that it is a double. The extra click cost actually really hurts because the way I've been playing Account Siphon in the past, and the reason why it was so powerful was because it was basically a combo card. It allowed you to set up this huge combo turn where you could potentially play 2 Account Siphons in a turn, swing 10 credits away from the corp, gain 20 credits as the runner, and have 1 spare click left to contest a remote or something similar. Typically, once I was ready for the big combo turn, my Account Siphon turn would usually be click 1, Account Siphon from hand, clicks 2 and 3, same old Account Siphon, because I would have pre-installed a same old thing prior to that, leaving me with a click 4 to challenge the remote if they were trying to score something. With Diversion of Fun, you can't do that because it's a double. Your clicks 1 and 2 would be Diversion of Fun. You get a 5 credit swing, that's pretty cool, and that's about it. You have nary any time to contest remotes after that or to do whatever nasty stuff you want to. So Diversion of Fun then becomes less of a combo card because you can't make this one big turn where you swing lots of credits to your end. And it's more of a tempo card where the corp loses tempo and you gain tempo. But in that respect, Diversion of Fun is a pretty inferior tempo card in itself compared to the rest of the card pool, in the sense that its numbers are underwhelming. For 2 clicks, you'd get a 9 credit swing in your favor. The corp loses 5 credits, you gain 4 credits, taking into account the 1 play cost. So 2 for 9 is pretty awful. That's slightly better than Sure Gamble. but not by much. Compared to account siphon, you really just can't compare it. Siphon was 1 click for 15 credit swing. You know, these are completely on different power levels. Not to mention that because it still requires a successful HQ run. If there's any ice on HQ at all that you have to break with real credits, Diversion of Fun becomes hardly playable. Its efficiency is going to be less than that of Sure Gamble, at which point you are wondering to yourself, why am I even including this card in my deck in the first place? After breaking ice, I might end the run with fewer credits than I started with, despite diverting the funds my way. So this big reason is why Diversion of Funds is practically unplayable in most criminal decks, even modern day criminal decks. It just doesn't work. So in what specific scenarios can Diversion of Fun be played? I can only think of two. The first is a run-based deck, but we know that's basically dead, even though Ken Tenma is still a thing, even though Diversion of Fun synergizes with Ken Tenma. You mitigate the one play cost. However, without cards like Desperado, which gain you extra value on making those HQ runs, it's just not going to be worth it. So we are not going to try that. Instead, we're going to look at the second option, a deck that can break ice for free. So if you can break ice for free, Diversion of Fun is still 2-click for 9 credit swing. It's still fairly decent. But what we really want is a deck that gains money when you break ice. I know, this is an unthinkable prospect, but I actually have a criminal deck for you. Some might not call it criminal, but it's blue, it's Geist. We are gonna play Account Siphon, or rather Diversion of Funds, in Geist. Why is it good in Geist? Well, your early game is all about setup, right? If you could think about most Geist decks, they are very setup reliant, they need their tech traders out, they need to get their breakers out, and yeah, they just spend a lot of the early game installing their stuff. The problem with that is that your draw engine isn't really set up. Even though your identity provides you with clickless draw, you need to fire trash cans in order to get said draw. But most of your trash cans are not fireable because this deck is 1/5 breaker, 3 Congamatos, 3 Gabalis, 3 grappling hooks, all of which cannot be used unless you're actually breaking ice. So they don't help you in setup at all. However, Diversion of Funds gives you a reason to fire said trash cans because you are breaking ice. So when you have a Gabali out on the table, preferentially with a Kongamato and grappling hook as well, you can just fire a blind Diversion of Funds into HQ and force a win-win decision. No matter what the corp chooses, you're winning. If the corp reses their HQ ice, you're gonna get lots of trash can triggers, lots of opportunities to fire your breakers, draw into more cards, and accelerate your setup. If they don't res, you're gonna get the 9 credit swing that you were looking for anyway, which is still a decent trade-off. So this is why Diversion of Fun is good. You break HQ ice for nothing. You can guarantee that Diversion of Funds lands successfully, which is quite important because if Diversion of Funds fails for any reason, you are now 2 clicks and a credit behind. That's a huge tempo loss. The Gabali Breaker Suite is very reliable at breaking most ice in the game. As long as there's no Navi Grid on HQ, basically any ice falls to Gabali and grappling hook. So Diversion of Funds, just like Knight in the Gape deck that I showed you back in 2014, basically guarantees that you'll land the Diversion of Funds, and that's a key reason why I think it's strong in this deck. Finally, you have the credit locking aspect. As I mentioned, one thing that I realized over the years is that credit locking the corp is a really good way to win. And while this deck doesn't really have the means to do that, you don't really want to recur Diversion of Funds with same old thing. It's very inefficient that way, but we have other decent credit denial cards as well in Maxwell James, which de-reses remote ice and makes it really difficult if the corp is rushing. There's also Corporate Grunt against those slower corps. They are bleeding a credit every turn, and that definitely adds up over time. So what you have is a really strong credit denial slash Diversion of Funds landing package, and we are going to see that in action as we play up against a Scorpio's deck. So once again, I'll be recording my commentary over video recording. Because of the double recording, there might be some lag spikes or frame drops. Please forgive me for that. I keep my opening hand here as Geist. In almost all matchups, this will be the case because there's an opening tech trader. That's exactly what you want to see. As Geist, you hard mulligan for it pretty much. Cherry on top of the cake are the 2 draw cards in Street Peddler, your best draw cards in the deck. So this is just a beautiful opening hand. Can't really ask for much more than that. Not much to say about that. My opponent opens with a turn 1 scoring standoff. This is usually a good idea as Scorpios because you want to get an agenda in your score area as soon as possible so that your archers and Tithoniums are turned on. However, my opponent completely forgot that they are playing against a successful demo of Diversion of Funds. Against a Diversion of Funds runner, you never, ever leave HQ open turn 1. That is just asking for trouble. So this is actually a big mistake from my opponent. They got really lucky here because given my opening hand, I cannot really challenge or contest the HQ and punish my opponent for such a greedy play with a turn 1 diversion. I don't have it in hand. So I'm gonna just proceed with my intended turn 1, which is play both Peddlers and the Tech Trader. This first Peddler gives me Grappling Hook Gabali, so it's the breaker combination you want. However, they're both on the same Street Peddler. I can only choose one of them, unfortunately. The second Peddler gives me Underworld Contacts and 2 Spy Cameras. A bit unfortunate that there are so many spy cameras stuck on the Peddler. I won't be able to use them in this pass, considering that I'm probably going to go for the Underworld Contact instead, which is Sustained Economy. Then I play the Tech Trader here. Now, usually at this point, most Geist players would be tempted to liberate the stuff off their Peddlers and get them to work immediately. Most likely, you would probably be using the second Peddler, trying to get the spy camera off, and then spying off the top of R&D, maybe getting a free agenda out of it. Here, I choose not to do that because, firstly, I think the sustained economy from Underworld is more important, and secondly, because I am worried about hard-hitting news. I do not know what kind of Scorpios my opponent is on, but you have to respect one of the more powerful win conditions in the current meta, hard-hitting news. I'm not rich enough to run Centrals yet, so I'm going to play passively and set up my board. This means that I'm going to keep everything installed. Now, another thing is that most people would just use their Street Peddlers here and install the stuff immediately, which gets them Geist draw, which gets them Tech Trader triggers. I'm not doing it here because I want to conserve my cards for Scorpios. By not allowing my opponent to trigger Scorpios this turn, because I'm not trashing any cards, they won't be able to remove cards from the game, and that's quite important to me. Right, so only on the second turn do I start popping my Street Peddlers to get Scorpios going. If Scorpios uses their ability here, that means I can trash cards for the rest of the turn without any much worry. Now we can see my opponent's going for a quick score here. They probably have an agenda in hand and they want to pump it out in the remote ASAP. Let's try to stop that. So we're going to pop both Peddlers here, one for Underworld. I haven't decided which one to pop for this second Peddler. I could go for Grappling Hook, I could go for Gabali. Same old thing is not a bad idea as well. In the end, I decided to go for Gabali because that's more or less your most reliable way of breaking end the run subroutines. You can deal with single subroutine ice with Gabali. You can also deal with multi subroutine ice like Archer, because Gabali breaks the most important subroutine on Archer, the end the run. So I popped it for Gabali here. Both Peddlers triggered Geist ability and we draw into Kongamato Diversion. Okay, that's a very lucky draw here. This means that I can potentially land a successful diversion of funds more or less after I drop the Kongamato from my hand. Because then, no matter what the HQ ice is on my opponent's HQ, I can break both the first and last subroutine with Kongamato Gabali. The only thing I can't really break is if there are any middle subroutines like Spider Web or Hive. Those would be bad ice for me, but I suspect my opponent's not running those kind of taxing ice because they're Scorpios. More likely than not, they'll be running ice like Enigma, ice like Vanilla Ice Wall, you know, ice with only one relevant end run subroutine because they are looking for the binary lockout instead of the tax that is imposed by multiple subroutines. So we are going to divert funds here. My opponent doesn't even bother raising the HQ ice, knowing that if they do, they're only going to accelerate me forward because I'll be able to expand my Gabali and Kongamatos, getting free Geist draws and free Tech Trader triggers. So the diversion of funds happens, and this is a win-win for me. I get 5 credits, my opponent loses 5. This is very important for me at this stage because I still don't know what my opponent's Scorpio's deck is. By doing the diversion here, I'm able to even out the credit levels at 7 apiece, making it that much harder for my opponent to land a hard-hitting news if they do have it in the deck. And you can see that they're so concerned about the diversion of funds messing the game plan that they actually use the Scorpio's trigger on it to remove it from the game. They don't want any more of that. So diversion of funds doing a lot of work here, even inducing the Scorpio's trigger. Now let's see if we're going to get hit by hard-hitting news. We don't. We click for credit on our last turn so that, you know, it's really difficult for Scorpios to justify landing a hard-hitting news. Now that we are safe from hard-hitting news, we can start drawing up through our deck. You'll notice that I'm going to use the Sports Hopper here to draw because our opponent flat out refused to give us card draw via Geist ability by popping Kongamatos and Gabalis. So my hope here is that I need to use some other cards to draw through my deck, and that's Sports Hopper. We are giving up the link from the Sports Hopper, which is important because we have an Underworld installed, but I think this is worth it because it draws us into both Maxwell James. So yes, we are going to have link for the rest of the game. That's settled for sure. We drop the Maxwell James for sure, and then with the last two clicks, it's really up to us. What are we going to install here? I'm going to drop the Spy Cam and see a Marcus Batty on top of R&D. So now this basically confirms the sort of deck my opponent is running. It's not a hard-hitting news deck. This is a rig shooter deck that uses Marcus Batty to fire trash program set routines. I would be very tempted to run R&D to trash this card here, but I think I'd rather save my breakers, i.e. my Gubalis and Kongamatos, for actual agendas rather than upgrades which don't give me any points. So the Batty stays on R&D. It's a tough choice because Batty can really screw me over down the road, and you would really like them to be trash, but I think I can't really afford to run R&D at this juncture just to trash a Batty. I need to at least set up a good breaker suite, which is my Armor Core. If I can get my Armor Core to a decent strength, then I can start running without too much worry. Right, my opponent goes for a quick agenda score here, thinking that this is a safe opportunity to get an agenda going, because they have 2 eyes on the remote and it's still fairly early game for Geist. Having only found 1 Gabali and 1 Kongamato, it might be difficult to convince myself to run the remote. Well, but they're mistaken, because between the Armor Core and the Kongamato in my hand, I can definitely challenge the remote. My only concern here is that they are bluffing me with an NGO friend. But this is why I run 2 copies of Falsified Credentials here. This exposed card allows me to determine whether it is time to run the remote or to set up. So I'm going to fire it off here, and I'm going to call Agenda, because if it's an agenda, I'm going to be losing my breakers in order to get in, and I want some form of compensation for that. So basically a lose less card if I choose agenda. I'm going to call agenda here, but I realize the other reason why I'm running Falsified Credentials here is because it's an expose effect, and that synergizes with my breaker Armor Core. So it only makes sense to install the Armor Core first before going for the remote. So I install the Armor Core first. Therefore, when I play the Falsified Credentials here and expose, I'll get a virus counter on Armor Core, which could be very key in breaking Strength 1 Ice. I'm going to call agenda, and indeed it's a Project Atlas that my opponent's attempting to over-advance in the remote. I have to go for it. The question is, do I run in as is, or do I run last click after installing the Kongamato? For insurance sake, I decided to install both Kongamatos here. So I'm going to run last click into a bunch of scary ice. We'll see if this pays off. The outermost ice turns out to be an ice wall, which is exactly what I want to see here, because single subroutine and the run ice are the kind of ice that Kongamato just flat out chews up. It does so much work because Kongamato is generally quite useless unless in tandem with Grappling Hook, in which case it gets you past 1 ice. But against most other ice, Kongamato does little. It's the single subroutine ice that Kongamato shines against. And you'll notice that Ice Wall here is strength 1. I chose to fire Kongamato here instead of using the Armor Core simply because I wanted the forward tempo. I wanted the Geist draw, I wanted the extra credit from Tech Trader. So I'm going to save my Armor Core for later. The inner ice was predictably an archer. Unfortunately, this means that my Armor Core is going to go down. I don't have a Grappling Hook, I don't have a Strength 6 Armor Core, so even though I can get through the archer and steal the Atlas by breaking the last subroutine with Gabali, I'm forced to give up my Armor Core, 1 of 2 in the deck, about to be removed from the game. So you win some, you lose some, but it was very important for me to challenge server 2 and deny the Project Atlas counter from my opponent. So you can see that my breaker suite inherently is very strong against Scorpios, even though I'm losing breakers left, right, center. They're going in the bin, potentially getting Scorpios out of the game. They deal very well with all these end the run ice, because typically only the last subroutines and end the run. It's very easy to break all these with Gabali. Right, so now that we are done with that run, my opponent is able to Hunter Seek my Maxwell James because I stole an agenda. This is a very smart move on my opponent's end, because they know that Maxwell James is essentially a breaker in Geist, because it allows them to get past any remote ice simply by de-resing it. So it's a one-time breaker, very useful, also powers up my Underworld contacts. I'm not going to start the turn with my Mr. Phones, 2 copies of Mr. Phones giving money. Unfortunately for my opponent, they don't know that I actually drew into both Maxwell James earlier on, so all I have to do is to drop this Maxwell James here, and this is where the game gets really disgusting, because they spend most of their money trying to advance the Atlas, res their Archer, and Hunter Seek my Maxwell James. They left themselves on 2 credits at the start of the turn. This corporate grunt here that I played before playing the Maxwell James just is locking their credit pool down. They are now down to 1 credit. They're basically forced to click for credits for the next few turns as I keep installing stuff and cost them credits. You're gonna see here, they can't do much other than to install in remote, take 2 credits. Normally I'll be forced to check server 2 here, but I don't have to, because even though I probably know that's a Marcus Batty, it could be a Project Atlas, but they can't really score it, because all I have to do is to drop the Fall Guy here. They go down from 3 credits to 2, they can't score agendas the next turn. Now I'm going to continue on my turn by popping the Fall Guy here and draw into my second Diversion of Funds. Oh man, oh man, this Scorpios deck is not going to have a fun day. They are going to be siphon locked into oblivion. Now, here's the important thing. This is a very good opportunity to contest the Marcus Batty in the remote. Because my opponent's on fewer than 4 credits, they cannot re-res the Archer if they wanted to. And they can't. They don't have any agendas in their score area to forfeit. So this is a very good time to clear the Marcus Batty from the remote before it gets to fire off and trash one of my programs or fire some other nasty subroutine. So here you're going to see me actually run HQ as my opponent laments about how disgusting corporate grunt is. I'm going to run HQ here, get a HQ access, but more importantly, activate Maxwell James. This allows me to de-res the Archer on the remote, which is a very, very painful thing to get de-res, as any Wayland deck would know. I'm gonna de-res it outside of the run, so they can't even fire Marcus Batty here to, end the run or gain 2 credits or anything. So now that Archer's de-res, the remote is basically benign. It's a useless remote with only a Ice Wall protecting it, so I can easily run the remote, break the Ice Wall with Kongamato, get another Kongamato in my hand because Armand Geist, and I'm gonna trash the Marcus Batty here. So just a huge swing in my favor. My opponent can't get their remote going, their Archer is dead, and I'm getting free accesses off Centrals, and they are too poor to respond. They can't rest Central Ice, they only have 2 credits. I see a fast track. That's not gonna really help you at this point as they click for credits. Well, I think it's time to divert their funds. No, we play Fall Guy first, bringing them down from 5 to 4 credits. So Diversion of Funds not going to be the most effective right now just yet. However, we draw into more breakers, so we just assemble those breakers. We are at a very healthy credit level, and we can easily threaten the remote by breaking the remote ice with Kongamato and Gabali respectively. My opponent just continues clicking for credits here, and this is another relic of players who have seen what Account Siphon is capable of. This is how you play against Account Siphon. You need to stack enough ice on HQ such that when they go in for a diversion of funds, you can offload all your credits in your credit pool into resing your HQ ice. That way, diversion of funds won't be able to divert funds because the corp won't have any money to spare for the runner. So this is good play from my opponent's end. Unfortunately for them, as a rush deck, this is not what they want to be doing. Ideally, my opponent wants to be stacking lots of ice on the remote, making it impossible for me to contest their agendas. But now they're forced to ice HQ, knowing that a diversion of funds can easily cause them to not be able to res their ice on the remote anyway. So basically my opponent's forced to play suboptimally just because of diversion of funds. They are too worried about diversion of funds at this point. Sorry for the video glitch there. We're going to continue by installing a Street Peddler here, seeing a grappling hook on the Street Peddler. That's a very nice card to see, allows us to get past Archer. We are gonna start making random runs here. No, we are just gonna install our link so that we can get Underworld contact money. My opponent goes for a surprise fast track here, fast track into hostile takeover, feeling very desperate at this point, needing the money to get back into the game, and needing the agenda in the score area to forfeit to Archer, right? They want to get the Archer on the remote re-res because they know that they've plinked away at 2 of my Maxwell James. Both of them are in the remove from game area because one from Hunter Seeker, the other from de-resing the Archer. My opponent removed both of them from the game, so if they can re-res Archer, I'm going to have a fairly hard time dealing with Archer. So a pretty good play on my opponent's end. Hostile takeover serving 2 purposes: to boost them out of diversion of funds range and to reactivate Archer. Right, what's my play here? This is going to be a very tricky juncture for me because I know I don't run legworks. Well, I think I don't. Let's double check. Yep, no legwork in my deck, so I can't really get at a hostile takeover in my opponent's hand. At best, it will be a 1 in 5 shot. Not worth it when there are 2 eyes on HQ. So I'm very tempted to fire a diversion of funds here, but what we first do is to... Sorry, video glitch again. Let's redo this. Right, so we fire the hopper here in order to give us more options, perhaps. And what we do find is a second copy of diversion of funds, so we can potentially double divert funds this turn. Not that that's going to be of much use, but we could potentially lock them on 0 credits after scoring the hostile takeover. That's an option. But yeah, not much in the way of good cards here. I'm not really fancying any of the cards I'm seeing in my hand. Grappling Hook, not that crucial. I'm looking at my Street Peddler again, and I decide that it's time to divert funds. So, by playing Diversion of Funds here, what I'm saying is essentially the video is glitching out a lot. By playing the Diversion of Funds here, I'm basically saying you can't score the hostile takeover next turn because you won't have the 2 credits needed to install double advance. So the Diversion of Funds here, well, all they could do is to res the outermost ice wall, which I break with Kongamato. For some reason, they can't res the inner ice. Maybe it's an Archer or a Titanium. Either way, that's very embarrassing because all 5 credits are going to get siphoned my way. Unfortunately for them, they are now stuck at 0 credits, so I can just spend the rest of my turn setting up as they are not able to score the hostile takeover this turn, buying me 1 more turn to potentially find a way into HQ. So they click for 3 credits as expected. They needed to click for 3 credits there because if they only click for 2, I would be able to use Corporate Grunt to force them to lose a credit, thereby preventing them from scoring hostile for yet another turn. Right, over to me. I decide that it's finally time to fire my Street Peddler on Spy Camera. There's not much else better under the Street Peddler, and I can foresee myself using Levy AR Lab Access sometime soon to get my entire deck back again. So yep, I'm going to Street Peddler here. It was either Spy Camera or Grappling Hook, but since I already have a hook in my hand, I don't need to keep the second one. We're going to fire it for Spy Camera. And the top card of R&D is SSL Endorsement. Haha, very interesting. It's a big 3-pointer agenda, and the Armand Geist trigger from Spy Camera just drew me into Mad Dash. So no need to overthink this. It's straight Mad Dash into R&D. Usually I would get insurance by installing the hook here first, but given they are only on 2 credits, they're so dirt poor, I don't have to worry about big ice. I can just Mad Dash here. What's the worst they could res? Ice Wall, Vanilla, Gabali breaks it. So Mad Dash in, they can't defend. I score the SSL for 3+1 points. I'm on match point. 6 agenda points to 0. Oh wait, I know where I can get the 7th agenda point from. Of course it's from HQ. The hostile takeover is still there, and I still have 2 Bitey Boys, 2 Gabalis to get into HQ with. I think my best play here is to run HQ twice. If I miss, I can levy and restart everything again. So we're going to run HQ here. Let's see how lucky we can get. Gabali fires, and of course they can't res the inner ice. They're too poor. We get hit the 1 in 5 snipe for the game. That game seemed like a dominating performance for Geist, as tends to be the case with Diversion of Funds / account siphon. When it gets going, it's like a snowball effect. If you manage to get the credit lock on the corp you get them to the point where they spend their clicks only clicking for credits, you are just snowballing out of control because your clicks are super efficient, you're playing good cards, and you're making valuable runs, whereas the core is spending their time doing inefficient actions like clicking for credits. The other thing about diversion of funds this game is that it allowed me to play a lot more aggressively for multiple reasons. My very first diversion of funds allowed me to run more safely, knowing that hard-hitting news was out of range. Sure, it ended up being the case that my opponent wasn't playing a hard-hitting news deck, but with deck lists unknown nowadays and so many corp threats, being able to suppress their credit lead is a huge deal. I can't stress this enough. Towards the mid to late game, the credit denial from my side enabled me to play a lot more aggressively because I did not have to worry about nasty ice. I knew that they couldn't res multi-subroutine ice against me after a certain point because they had fewer than 5 credits in their pool. So no Morcelus, no Tithonium, no nasty ice. I was able to much more confidently run even though I didn't have grappling hook installed for said multi-subroutine ice. I was also able to prevent them from scoring hostile takeover over multiple turns. That's absolutely insane. Can you believe it? Nowadays, in a climate where credit denial is scarce, corps almost never have problems with the money needed to score agendas. So diversion of funds coming back really brings this back into the forefront and really harkens back to the old days where account siphon can just outright stop you from scoring agendas altogether simply because you don't even have 3 credits in your credit pool. Also, Scorpios double icing HQ. They would never ever do that under almost every other matchup. You wouldn't see 2 ice on HQ for a Scorpios a rushy Scorpios deck. But diversion of funds really diverted my opponent's attention, forced the ice onto a server that they didn't want to ice, and I was able to profit off that. All this allowed me to run more aggressively, get lots of accesses on R&D and HQ, and close out the game for an easy win. So that's credit denial for you. Very powerful archetype that I managed to successfully use against my opponent today. Now, it bears mentioning that diversion of funds has its downsides as mentioned in the intro. I didn't really get to illustrate them this game, but here's an example. Here's a screenshot from my second diversion of funds. I just played it. Clicks 1 and 2, divert into HQ. They res an ice wall, which allowed me to pop a Kongamato for extra draw. But this extra draw came back to bite me, as I only had 2 clicks left to get rid of the 8 cards in my hand. Right? We have the discard phase, we discard cards if we have more than 5 cards in hand, and it turns out that there are lots of useful cards in my hand. I can't afford to ditch the last diversion of funds, for example, or the levy, or the second tech trader. All of these are good cards that I wanted to keep in my hand, but I only had 2 clicks to play as many of them as I could. Not very feasible. I end up playing 2 of those cards. I believe it was Gabali and Tech Trader, but that meant that I wasn't able to take advantage of this huge window where my opponent was on 0 credits, not even able to threaten me with a Hunter Seeker. I could have ran R&D here, but I had to play the cards from my hand because all of them were so good. So this is the downside of diversion being a double coming into play. Had I had extra clicks remaining, I would have been able to perhaps run R&D and set up my board state. Of course, I can't compare this directly to account siphon because if this were account siphon instead, I would have to spend clicks clearing tags, but you get the drift. It's still a downside of diversion being a double. Now let's move on into our usual combos and nombos section. Diversion of funds has a very good synergy with mining accident. I really wanted to play a deck with both of these cards because they're both credit denial cards, and in the event your opponent decides not to go for the credit denial route by taking bad publicity, it fuels diversion of funds as well, making your HQ ice that much cheaper to break, which means that you'll be gaining more money swing out of diversion of funds. So it's a very good pairing if you can afford to fork out the 6 influence to splash 3 copies of mining accident into criminal. Another good combo is Rubicon Switch. I know this is very disgusting, dirty, whatever you want to call it, but there was a reason why so many people say Rubicon is such a negative player experience card, and that's because if it pairs with a card like Diversion of Funds, you are able to wield the corpse credits against them, using their hard-earned credits to de-res their own ice. That is a very painful feeling, and of course they'll be forced to res their HQ ice, otherwise they'll get Diversion of Funded. Whatever the case is, it's not pretty. You can explore this archetype if you wish. We are not going to touch on that in our videos. Finally, the interaction that I really wanted to make work was Diversion of Funds with Shadow Net. I think this is a very powerful combo. Firstly, because as we saw in pre-2017 era, Account Siphon works very well when you're able to recur it with deja vus and same old things to perpetually siphon your opponent every turn. While you won't have as much of an extent of siphon locking your opponent, Shadow Net is still a very good combo with Diversion of Funds for the other reason, and that is that you get to ignore the extra click cost of Diversion of Funds. This was the biggest downside of Diversion of Funds, as we mentioned earlier, the fact that it costs 2 clicks to play. Shadow Net, on Diversion of Funds, ignores the double, so you only play it with 1 click, allowing you to potentially get some big combo turns off. I wasn't able to make this archetype work in the end because it's very hard to find a deck that wants to play Shadow Net and Fan Sites, obviously. But if you can make a deck that utilizes this very well and is able to put on the credit denial pressure, it can be very powerful. Now let's move on to the nombos. Firstly, you don't want to play Diversion of Funds out of faction. I've tried, believe me, I've tried to make so many decks. I've seen people play Reina, Roja, Credit Denial, the Nexus, Maxwell James decks that de-res Ice and also play Diversion of Funds to get HQ runs. You're spending so much influence on Diversion of Funds that it's not even funny. With that 5 influence per Diversion of Funds, you could easily buy other cards in the large card pool that would certainly do more work than Diversion of Funds. Even though it directly synergizes with Credit Denial from Maxwell James D-Res and Reina Roja and Mining Accidents, I don't think it's justifiable to spend that much influence on this combo, given the relatively low power level of Diversion of Funds. There are better cards to spend, so unfortunately, or rather fortunately, because one of the biggest complaints about Account Siphon was that it was only 4 influence. I say only because you saw me play it in Shaper and Anarch. The 5 influence makes all the difference in deterring me from trying that out. The other combo we have is DDoS. This was a very popular combo in conjunction with Account Siphon, simply because you're essentially saying to the corp, if you don't put 2 eyes on your HQ, you're in a lot of trouble. This was one of the big combos that made it fairly easy for me to land Account Siphons when I was playing DLR Max at Worlds. But with Diversion of Funds, it's different. I think this is a nombo, even though Account Siphon and Diversion do basically the same thing. The problem with Diversion is that once again, its double nature works against it because it gives you 1 fewer click to make a run on some other server during that DDoS turn. DDoS, after all, only lasts for 1 turn. If your first click is play DDoS and clicks 2 and 3 are Diversion of Funds, you only have 1 measly click remaining to take advantage of the DDoS turn. The bigger issue also is that DDoS is 3 to play. You cannot justify paying 3 for DDoS to only land 1 Diversion of Funds. The math just doesn't work out. That's 3 clicks and 4 credits for a 10 credit swing. Yeah, if you do the maths, it really doesn't work out. Trust me on that. And for the same reason, Diversion of Funds is a nombo with Same Old Thing and Apocalypse, 2 cards that you can see working well with Account Siphon. On the right, you see that is actually Mike Sheehan's Euros 2017 winning deck. Back when Account Siphon was legal, he played Account Siphon Wizard with a singleton Apocalypse and lots of Siphon Recursion, 3 Deja Vus, 3 Same Old Things. All these cards don't work well with Diversion of Funds for the same reason as why they don't work with DDoS. You cannot Diversion of Funds into HQ and then follow it up with an Apocalypse because you need 1 click to run R&D, 1 click to run HQ, 1 click to run Archives to trigger the Apocalypse. Siphon allows you to do that because Siphon is a single click. Diversion of Funds does not. So that's the nombo right there. Same thing with Same Old Thing. Same Old Thing, Account Siphon is usually 2 clicks, but Same Old Thing Diversion is 3 clicks. That is a very, very high price to pay for a 10 credit swing, or 9 credits if you count the play cost of Diversion of Funds. It just doesn't work out mathematically. So yeah, a lot of nombos because of the way Diversion of Funds was designed, which is why I consider it to be a lot less useful, a lot less versatile than Account Siphon. But I guess that's a good thing for the game. In short, well, that was episode 50, our very special episode 50. Thank you all for making this series possible. When I started it, I said it would be a short series that, was just a spin-off of Terminal Directive cards, but we've come so far, and unfortunately our run's about to end because there are no new cards coming out. We still have one more big box to cover, which we will, that's Rain and Reverie. So yeah, there will be a few more episodes after this episode 50 special. I hope you'll stay tuned for them. It's going to be a blast, and it's been a blast, I should say. And once again, thanks to everyone for all your generous support, all your upvotes, all your viewership numbers for making it happen. All my successful demo videos have consistently pulled in more than 1,000 viewers, which is pretty atypical, and it's thanks to your support that keeps me motivated, keeps me going to publish these videos. So once again, a big thank you, and I'll see you in the next big box. Goodbye.